A man wanted in connection with the deadly shooting of an Alabama A&M University student now in custody.
As police just identified this victim behind me, that's 19-year-old Nadia Perkins of Montgomery.
She documented everything, her laughter, her dreams of becoming a criminal justice major, the excitement of finally building a life on her own. Her parents' last conversation with her was about something as ordinary as a frustrating test, a moment so normal it should have meant nothing. But within days, that normalcy shattered into a manhunt, a relationship her family feared turning deadly, and a college freshman found lifeless in an apartment she had been warned not to return to. It's a chilling reminder that sometimes the danger isn't hiding in the dark. It's right in front of you. And by the time you realize it, it's already too late. This is the story of Nadia Perkins, and it should be heard because sometimes the warning signs are there, but they're not enough to stop what's already been set in motion. Nadia had only just begun her first year at Alabama A&M University, stepping away from Montgomery, Alabama, to study criminal justice and build a future she had worked hard to reach. Like many freshmen, she arrived in Huntsville carrying a mix of independence, nerves, and hope for what lay ahead. Around the same time, she had recently met a man named Ahmad Khalil Barney, someone who had quickly become part of her new surroundings. What should have been a season of growth instead shifted in a way no one around her could have anticipated. That morning, the atmosphere around the apartment complex was disrupted by the sound of multiple gunshots, according to nearby residents. Some later recalled hearing a woman calling out shortly before everything went silent. Within a short time, the area filled with emergency responders, and the quiet routine of the building was replaced by flashing lights and investigative activity. As authorities worked to understand what had taken place, early findings began to point towards someone within Nadia's own circle. An outcome that felt as tragic as it was grimly predictable, in the way bad decisions often arrive faster than common sense. Before long, Ahmad was identified by investigators as a person of interest. By that stage, however, he was no longer at the scene. A coordinated search began across Huntsville, with officers moving through different areas and following any lead that could bring answers. In just a matter of hours, a young student's pursuit of a better life had turned into a case that demanded urgent attention, leaving behind a story that would now be examined piece by piece. If you value stories that center the Black community and bring awareness to cases that deserve to be heard, consider liking the video and subscribing. Nadia Diana Lee Perkins was a young girl from Montgomery, Alabama, standing at the edge of adulthood, with most of her story still waiting to be written. Her early years were spent in Montgomery, where she grew up surrounded by people who knew her well and remembered her for her lively presence. She was often described as talkative and full of energy, someone who naturally drew attention without trying. There was a lighthearted side to her personality that made everyday moments feel brighter. Those close to her recalled her as playful and humorous, the kind of person who could turn even a quiet room into something a little louder, whether people were ready for it or not. Creative expression seemed to come naturally to her. Singing and dancing were among the things she enjoyed most, often shared with friends in ways that made simple moments feel special. She also spent time developing her skills as a hairstylist, even creating an Instagram page to showcase her work and connect with others who appreciated it. Like many in her generation, she documented her life through short videos and vlogs. Small, everyday moments were recorded and shared, conversations with friends, laughter between classes, or updates about her day.
We in the line waiting to graduate. Yeah. The team. This is my bestie.
Other clips captured events that felt more meaningful at the time, and snapshots of progress that reflected a young life steadily moving forward. A significant milestone was reached when she graduated from high school in Montgomery. It was a moment that carried weight not just for her, but for everyone who had supported her journey. One chapter had closed, and another had quietly begun. The celebration that followed was filled with photos, videos, and shared excitement. the kind of joy that feels permanent in the moment, even if life later proves otherwise. After graduating, a direction was chosen for what would come next. Criminal justice stood out as the path she wanted to follow. It was not only about securing a profession, but about contributing to something larger than herself. The idea of helping others through systems designed to protect and serve held real meaning. Whether that path would eventually lead to investigative work, public service, or another role, the intention remained steady. She wanted her work to matter. An application was submitted, and she was later accepted into Alabama A&M University in Huntsville, Alabama. For many young people, leaving a familiar hometown for college marks a turning point. Independence begins to replace routine, and responsibilities shift in ways that are both exciting and uncertain. It is often the first real step toward defining who someone is outside of their upbringing. For Nadia, the move to Huntsville carried that same weight. It offered distance, opportunity, and a chance to build something new from the ground up. The city itself had a reputation that drew students in. Huntsville had grown steadily over the years, known for its connection to innovation, on aerospace work, and institutions like NASA's Marshall Space Flight Center. Colleges in the area welcome students with a wide range of ambitions, from technical fields to areas like law and criminal justice, creating an environment shaped by forward-looking goals. To someone just beginning their college experience, it could easily feel like a place where anything might be possible. As her first semester unfolded, she began adjusting to the rhythms of university life. Classes required focus and adaptation to new expectations. Friendships formed gradually, built from shared spaces and everyday interactions. Living away from home introduced a balance between freedom and accountability, something that rarely comes with clear instructions. During this period, a new connection entered her life. Ahmad Khalil Barney. As a 20-year-old living in Huntsville, became someone she began to spend time with. Their interaction developed in a familiar way, conversations, shared moments, and a growing sense of comfort. It followed the kind of pattern many young relationships do, where things feel simple at first, almost like they are supposed to happen that way. Over time, what began casually grew into something more defined, lasting several weeks, possibly longer. For Nadia, it may have seemed like just another part of adjusting to a new environment. From a distance, however, her parents in Montgomery viewed the situation differently. At some point, they became aware of her connection with him. Concern followed not long after. Her father, in particular, expressed hesitation and advised her to avoid going to his residence. The warning reflected a feeling that is hard to explain but often hard to ignore. One of those instincts that arrives quietly, usually without evidence and sometimes, unfortunately, without being taken seriously. At that point in life, relationships often develop at a fast pace. Independence, emotions, and personal limits are all being figured out at once, and that mix can create friction. Disagreements are not unusual, and sometimes warning signs are clearer to those on the outside than to the people involved. In many situations, those tensions eventually pass as individuals separate and move forward. In this case, however, the connection between Nadia Perkins and Ahmad Barney had only been established for a short period, yet concerns had already begun to emerge. What could not have been anticipated was how quickly those concerns would shift into something far more serious, something that would take shape inside an apartment on Julia Street, where a disagreement between the two would begin to intensify beyond control in a way no one could later undo. On March 4th, 2026, that sense of normalcy was abruptly interrupted. At some point during the day, Nadia was inside an apartment on Julia Street in Huntsville. The residence was linked to Ahmad Khalil Barney, the individual she had been spending time with in the weeks prior. The exact reason for their meeting that day has not been fully clarified, but it was later confirmed that both were present inside the apartment. As is often the case between people who are familiar with one another, the interaction appears to have begun as a conversation. At first, it may not have seemed significant, but discussions can shift quickly when emotions are already elevated. Investigators later indicated that the exchange did, in fact, escalate. What began as a conversation developed into an argument, with tension building as voices likely became more intense. The specific topic remains unclear, but the situation progressed to a point where the atmosphere inside the apartment changed noticeably. Authorities believe the argument continued to intensify until it reached a critical stage. During that time, a firearm became involved. The exact sequence of how it appeared is still being examined, but what followed did not go unnoticed by others nearby. Individuals in the surrounding area later reported hearing multiple gunshots coming from the apartment complex. Some estimated that as many as 5 shots were fired. Shortly after, an additional sound was described, someone calling out for help. In a matter of moments, the situation inside the apartment had escalated beyond recovery.
Alabama A&M University tells us that Perkins was a freshman studying criminal justice. She was from Montgomery. Now, the shooting that took her life happened yesterday morning. That's when people in the area heard gunshots. When officers got here, neighbors pointed them towards an apartment. Inside, they found Perkins dead. The coroner ruling her death a homicide. Huntsville police.
By the time the noise subsided, Nadia Diana Elise Perkins had sustained fatal injuries, a devastating outcome, and a stark reminder that some arguments once started don't end with anyone getting the last word. After reports of gunfire were made, emergency services were dispatched to the apartment complex on Julia Street. Upon arrival, officers and first responders moved through the property to identify where the disturbance had originated. What was found inside one of the units confirmed a devastating outcome. Nadia Perkins was located within the apartment, having been injured by gunfire. Despite attempts by responders to provide aid, her life could not be saved. She was just 19 years old, a college freshman who had only recently arrived in Huntsville to begin a new chapter. Within a short time, the situation shifted from emergency response to a full homicide investigation. The apartment and nearby areas were secured as detectives and forensic teams arrived to assess the scene. The property on Julia Street soon became active with officers, marked vehicles, and investigators carefully working through each detail. Inside the unit, documentation began as part of the standard investigative process. Photographs were taken, physical evidence was gathered, and individuals in the vicinity were approached for information. Statements from those nearby became an important part of understanding the timeline, as several people reported hearing the gunfire and some recalled a woman calling out. Details that, while difficult to hear, often become the clearest pieces in reconstructing what can no longer speak for itself. Clarity began to emerge in a relatively short time. Details collected from the scene, combined with accounts from those nearby and the overall context, directed investigators towards someone who had been part of Nadia's life. Attention was soon centered on Ahmad Khalil Barney, the individual she had been spending time with in the weeks prior. Authorities identified the connection between them as a domestic relationship. This detail suggested that what had unfolded inside the apartment was not random, but rooted in something personal, an argument that, like many, started small and somehow managed to escalate far beyond where it ever should have gone. As the investigation progressed, another issue became clear. Barney was no longer at the location. By the time officers began actively looking for him, he had already left the apartment complex. With that development, the case entered a different stage. The focus was no longer limited to analyzing the scene, but expanded into locating a person of interest believed to still be within the city. Law enforcement began coordinating search efforts throughout Huntsville. Certain areas, including locations near Shields Road and Jordan Road, were identified as places where he might have been seen. Multiple units were assigned to assist as officers worked to narrow down his whereabouts. Patrol vehicles moved through surrounding neighborhoods while additional resources were brought in to support the effort. Teams included K-9 units trained for tracking and aerial surveillance using drones. Officers canvassed streets, nearby wooded spaces, and adjacent properties, following leads as they developed. Because once someone leaves the scene, finding them often becomes a race against time, and time rarely waits around for explanations. The search led to increased activity across several areas of the city.
However, the last known visual that we had of him was more towards a wooded area. So it's important for people to know that. Because he has an active murder warrant for his arrest, he should be assumed to be armed and dangerous.
And any message for the public right now?
The message is simple. If you see him, immediately call 911. Do not approach. Give us your location.
As information continued to come in, investigators were able to narrow their focus. A lead directed officers to Century Street, where Barney was believed to be located. Units responded to the area and moved in to make contact. After the widespread effort to locate him, the situation concluded without additional incident. Barney was taken into custody by law enforcement officers and transported, bringing an end to the search, an outcome that, while controlled, so stood in quiet contrast to how quickly everything had unraveled before it. As Barney entered custody, further information regarding his past gradually came into view. A review of court records revealed a prior charge from the year before, related to receiving stolen property in the second degree. The item involved had been listed as a Taurus G2 handgun, a compact 9mm firearm typically intended for concealed carry. Following that earlier case, the weapon would have been seized by authorities and returned to its owner. With no bond in place, Barney remained in custody. Independent of the current allegations, the revocation ensured he would not be released as the legal process continued. He was held at the Madison County Jail while investigators worked toward finalizing their case and preparing for the next legal steps. As the investigation expanded, another arrest was made. An individual identified as Kevon Ford, also associated with Julia Street, was charged with conspiracy to commit murder. At that stage, authorities had not established whether his case was directly linked to Nadia Perkins' death, leaving that question unanswered as inquiries continued. Looking ahead, a preliminary hearing is scheduled for April 8, 2026. This stage is critical as it determines whether there is sufficient evidence for the case to move forward to trial. While other hearings may follow, such as grand jury proceedings, trial scheduling, and eventually the trial itself. April 8th remains the only publicly confirmed date at this time. The process is measured, but for those following the case, it underscores how the legal system takes its time, even when events outside the courtroom unfolded with irreversible speed. While these developments were unfolding in Huntsville, the impact reached Montgomery, where Nadia's family was faced with the reality of the loss. Their final conversation with her had been ordinary, centered around school and a test that had been causing her some frustration. It was the kind of exchange most people would barely remember later, except this time it quietly became the last one, a reminder that life rarely signals which moments will matter most until it's already too late to ask for a retake. Family members remembered Nadia as someone whose presence naturally lifted the mood of those around her. She was warm, kind, and always willing to lend a hand or offer support whenever it was needed. To those who knew her best, she remained the same spirited young woman from Montgomery, laughing with friends, singing along to her favorite songs, and holding on to plans for the future she was determined to create.
She was loved by so many people. She did not deserve this. Last year, she had so many different accolades.
We knew of him because she called us about him. They'd been talking for about a couple weeks.
As investigators worked to compile evidence and prosecutors prepared the legal case that would eventually move through the courts.
Our next step in this, now that he's been arrested, he's been booked in, is justice for Nadia, the Perkins family.
Nadia's family had to face a reality that no investigation could undo. She had been a devoted daughter, a college freshman just beginning her studies in criminal justice, and a young woman taking her first steps toward independence and the career she envisioned. Everything she had been building, the freedom, the education, and the dreams of a life she had carefully imagined, was lost in a single moment inside the apartment on Julia Street. Now her loved ones, along with members of the Huntsville community who had only just begun to know her, were left with a question that too often follows sudden tragedies.
She was bubbly. She was always peacemaker, trying to keep everybody together. She's just a light, and this is senseless.
How could a disagreement between two people spiral into consequences so permanent that nothing can ever reverse them? It is a reminder, both bitter and darkly ironic, that life's ordinary conflicts can sometimes escalate in ways no one expects, and that the smallest moments can carry consequences far beyond what anyone could have imagined. My thoughts on this case are that there were warning signs, red flags, that were missed, signals in the relationship or the behavior that, if noticed and addressed, might have prevented the outcome. While hindsight is always clearer, it reminds us how important it is for families, friends, and communities to recognize patterns that could lead to harm. As members of the Black community, we need to talk openly about healthy relationships, emotional boundaries, and early warning signs of conflict. We need to create safe spaces where young people feel supported, where guidance and intervention are available, and where no one feels trapped in a situation that could escalate. Cases like Nadia's are devastating, but they can also serve as a call to action, to educate, to intervene early, and to ensure that other families don't experience the same loss. If this story moved you, share it to raise awareness, because stories like Nadia's deserve to be heard and justice shouldn't be forgotten.